This episode is sponsored by True Recovery. If you or someone you care for is dealing with addiction, you know that finding a treatment option that works for you can be extremely frustrating. Truth is, every patient's needs are different and constantly evolving. That's why we stand behind True Recovery. Find out more about the range of services at truerecovery.com. I'm woefully aware of how few people know anything about the opioid crises in America. Opiates, opioids, and the problems they cause are in the headlines daily, but this drug's use actually started thousands of years ago. Last week, our story began with the Neanderthals, who may have been the first humans to use the opium poppy, and concluded with our discussion of the Greek physicians' use of the plant. This week, our story continues with a famous figure in history and features more excerpts from an interview with the author Kenaz Filan, whose book, The Power of the Poppy, Harnessing Nature's Most Dangerous Plant Ally, chronicles some of the earliest uses of Papaver somniferum, a.k.a. the opium poppy. And now DrDrew.com presents the history of opium. Part 2. The poppy's popularity continues. Alexander the Great, king of Macedonia, introduced the cultivation and use of opium to Persia and India in 330 BC, likely brought along with his conquest to help his soldiers fight bravely and die painlessly. Knowledge of the drug spread through these two civilizations as he conquered his way through. Often described as one of the most powerful and influential leaders in the ancient world, Alexander was tutored by Aristotle in his youth, who was, of course, aware of opium and its many uses. Aristotle was a biologist at his core. Despite his penchant for dosing soldiers with opium, Alexander's downfall may have been connected to alcohol. He definitely drank to excess. One biographer purported that the greatest military technician of all time was a drunk. He definitely was. There's no doubt alcoholic. And, of course, alcoholics sometimes get high off extreme circumstances like battle. And his statesmanship ultimately was adversely affected. He ended up killing one of his best friends. He pretty clearly, his demise was related to alcohol and may have been directly related to his death. Given the Roman Empire's proximity to Greece, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, it should come as no surprise that people were also using opium regularly around the same period. As with the aforementioned cultures, opium poppies were being cultivated and harvested primarily for medicinal use at the time. Sold everywhere in the streets, it was eaten with honey to combat bitterness, and women soaked wool tampons in opium solutions to reduce menstrual pain. Literary references continue, perhaps most notably in Virgil's The Aeneid, where it's referenced as a soporific or sleep aid.
Demeter was a goddess of agriculture. She was also a goddess of healing, and she comes to represent, the poppy's more benevolent aspect, the poppy's ability to take away physical pain, the poppy's ability to take away emotional pain. It's also a very powerful antidepressant. But under Hecate, opium has a darker side to it. Their opium can kill. You can use it. They were using it to poison babies. You could give it to people. You mixed it with hemlock and you had a really nice poison that would put somebody to a sleep they'd never awaken from. That dual nature between, the Demeter, this is a plant of healing, this is a plant of relief, and Hecate, this is a very, very dangerous plant. This is a plant you can kill with. This is a plant poisoners go to. Later on it becomes, this is a plant that you will become addicted to. And all these things, the Romans begin becoming aware of that.
Famed Roman philosopher, naturalist, author Pliny the Elder, this is around 79 AD, also described the drug's many uses, but warned of its dangers. So now we're starting to hear adverse effect creeping in. This may be one of the first instances in which the addictive qualities were being noticed. Marcus Aurelius, of course, the great Stoic emperor of Rome from 161 to 180 AD, was prone to headaches and stress, and none other than Galen, one of the great Roman physicians, prescribed him opium for those conditions. Galen, a physician, writer, philosopher, he was of Greek heritage and often lauded as the greatest medical researcher of antiquity. He developed the circulation of the heart, or the idea that the heart circulation was as it is. Widely respected, his theory and practice went well beyond his lifetime. Despite the knowledge that has been amassed about the uses and effects of opium, Marcus Aurelius' prescription was increased over time, possibly due to tolerance. Addiction and withdrawal were not yet medical concepts. Ancient China also familiar with opium and its uses, but there are differing opinions about how and when it got there. The discovery of storage vessels containing evidence of poppies dating back to the second millennial BC have been found in a religious complex at the Merv Oasis, located west of Urumqi, China. There appears to be a significant gap in the Chinese history after that. What is known is that by 1000 AD, medicinal use of opium was widespread. Some experts believe that it may have arrived in China around 100 BC via sailors or Tibetan priests, returned with it from Africa or India. Other accounts have it arriving with Turkish or Arab traders during the Tang Dynasty, again 1680 to 907 AD. Though the date is disputed, the Chinese people's profound understanding of the medicine is not. Texts dating back 7,000 years document their medicinal practices and treatment, and they clearly recognize the connection between mind, body, and spirit. Hua Tuo, in 400 AD, the Chinese father of surgery, is known for having invented an anesthetic called Mafei San, boiled anesthetic, which was taken orally to render the patient unconscious prior to surgery. Some experts believe this was a mixture of cannabis and opium. This is based on the assumption that Mafei is a transcription of an Indo-European word for morphine. It's unlikely that we will ever know what his recipe consisted of because Hua Tuo burned many of his writings prior to his death. The Golden Age of Islam, 7th to 13th century, set into motion after the Muslim leaders had established one of the largest empires in history. It also ushered in an era that greatly valued the art, science, and culture, all of which flourished under the leading scholars of the day. Encouraged by the work of Hippocrates, Dioscorides, and Galen, medical scholars had robust interest in the development of medicine.
Pretty much what you see opiates used for today is what you were seeing them used for in the Islamic era, in the Greek era, and in the Roman era, and most likely in the Mesopotamian era. You had them for cough suppressants, you had them for pain relief. Avicenna, who's probably one of the most famous of them, used them as an anti-diarrheal agent, and also used them for recreational purposes.
Avicenna, roughly 1000 AD, a polymath who is often referred to as the father of early modern medicine, emerged as a great scholar during this period. Avicenna called opium the most powerful of stupefacents and chronicled its numerous uses in his momentous work, Canon of Medicine. Referring to it in his writing as Aphion, he describes opium's beneficial uses as an analgesic for gout, hypnotic for insomnia, and antitussive for cough. He also discussed a treatment for diarrhea and a cure for sexual dysfunction, particularly excessive sex drive, which opium, of course, can suppress. He also noted instances in which it shouldn't be used, such as treatment for certain GI problems, because it would worsen constipation, could make things adverse. The drug was being administered in a variety of ways, including orally, topically, rectally, and intranasally. Avicenna thought that opium should be used only as a last resort and preferred to treat the cause of the pain rather than the pain itself. This may have been because he was aware of how chronic opium use could affect the proper functioning of memory and reasoning, and as we've found in the modern era, makes pain worse. He had great insight back then, but it took us another 1,000 years to figure it out. He also knew that its causes a respiratory suppression and death. Once, after a series of self-administered enemas went awry, Avicenna treated himself with a medication called mithridate, a mixture of many ingredients, including a mild solution of opium. An interesting side note is that a slave once tried to poison Avicenna with an opium overdose. In 1200 OD, opium was very popular in India. Every class eating and drinking opium regularly. Indian scholars were also contributing to the pool of knowledge about it in several medical treatises. The volumes echo previously known uses for it as well, including the treatment of diarrhea and sexual problems. In the late 1200s, in the Mongol Empire, led by Kublai Khan, it was regularly using opium as a household remedy for any number of ailments. The 14th century begins a period when opium is absent from most European history. This is due to the launch of the Inquisition. The purpose was, of course, to root out all acts of heresy and activities linked with the devil, and that included opium and opium use.
The trade routes started just breaking down. The Roman grass starts growing on the Roman roads. As areas went out of Roman control, they went out of the Roman trade network. Opium wasn't really there at the time. With the Crusades, you start seeing a little more trade opening up between Europe and the Arab world. Opium wasn't really grown anywhere in Europe by this point. The opium production had all been processed out to mostly Egypt. There you also get a little more distrust because, again, there's the idea this stuff is coming from the heathens. The whole idea that poppy has the sinister aura of coming from the east. Well, no, poppy was coming back to the west from the east.
story picks up again with Paracelsus in roughly 1500, a Swiss-born physician who rejected the ideas of Galen, famously threw Avicenna's canon of medicine into a bonfire, and his extensive education and travels to places like Arabia and Egypt informed his medical theories. As a result, he is responsible for combining the tenets of chemistry with the practice of medicine. He felt that health was dependent on man achieving harmony with nature and pioneered the use of chemicals and minerals in his medicines. He used such substances as mercury, lead, arsenic, and antimony in his treatments. Paracelsus also created the first version of laudanum, named for the Latin laudare, which means to praise. Laudanum was the result of his discovery that opium dissolved better in alcohol than in water. His tincture of opium was a solution of 10% opium powder dissolved in alcohol, to which he added other ingredients like crushed pearls, musk, and amber. Laudanum makes its next major appearance when an English physician named Thomas Sydenham, this is roughly 1650, reconfigured the recipe.
Thomas Sydenham was interesting. He fought in Cromwell's army. He was not one of the most educated of doctors at the time. He only got his Doctor of Medicine degree by the time he was the leading physician in London. He was basically not relying on astrology. He was relying on examination. He kept meticulous records, and he came up with a cordial that he named after Paracelsus, laudanum. And laudanum was opium, a little bit of saffron, some cloves and cinnamon, and you dissolved it in a pint of Canary wine or sherry, simmered it, and that basic recipe has been used for a long time. That was the gold standard for several hundred years for pain relief.
Sydenham, considered the founder of clinical medicine and epidemiology, and the English Hippocrates, he was called. He simplified and standardized the formula, which he developed by using a mixture of opium and sherry that he flavored with cinnamon, saffron, and cloves. The concoction was marketed as a cure-all for conditions such as, quote, women's troubles, unquote, cardiac disease, and rheumatism, to name just a few. He penned a book, Medical Observation Concerning the History and Cure of Acute Diseases, in which he advertised his version of laudanum and extolled its virtues. Nicknamed Opophilios, lover of opium, Sydenham claimed that the medicine would be a cripple without the opium. I'm delighted that Kenaz will join us again next week to discuss how addiction began to take roots on 3 continents. I want to thank our staff at Doctor.com, particularly Michelle Poe, for pulling this opium series together. Read the entire series and all our weekly medical articles at drdrew.com, and be sure to join our email list at drdrew.com/contact. And please do tell a friend. We hope you've enjoyed this chapter of the history of opium, which is sponsored by True Recovery. If you or someone you care for is dealing with addiction, you know that finding a treatment option that works for you can be quite frustrating. Truth is, every patient's needs are different and they are evolving. People behind True Recovery in Orange County, California realize that effective care cannot be a one-size-fits-all. That's why they've developed a comprehensive range of treatments that addresses all the needs of a drug addict and alcoholic, and as well as co-occurring disorders. True Recovery's master-level clinicians maintain small caseloads, allowing them to truly personalize their care. They offer individualized treatment plans from residential to outpatient, always with a holistic approach and a focus on accountability. As the patients become ready, True Recovery offers assistance with life and coping skills, school and vocational coordination, as well as community reintegration support, a critical piece that's often missed by many programs, getting people back to work and back to living. I've spoken with True Recovery's medical director, and I was impressed with the range of therapeutic modalities and psychiatric services. Their experienced team is well equipped to manage patients at all levels of care. To request more information on how True Recovery can provide you personalized care, go to drdrew.com/true. Again, that is drdrew.com/TRUE. We'll see you next week.